Hello and welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Welcome to another episode in our Know Your Neighbors series. Today the country we'll be exploring is Barbados. A former British colony, Barbados is located in the Lesser Antilles or Eastern Caribbean, east of St. Lucia and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In many global telecommunications and ICT-related assessments, Barbados tends to be among the top-ranked countries in the Caribbean region, which speaks not only to the state of telecommunications and ICT there, but also points to perceptions of competitiveness and potential to leverage technology. Our guest today, David Smith, is an information technologist at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus, Barbados, and he's also the president of the Barbados Chapter of the Internet Society. So through this conversation with David, we hope to get a better understanding of, among other things, what the ICT technology space is like in Barbados, what are some of the tech-related policies and initiatives that the government of Barbados adopted to make the country one of the leaders in the telecommunications and ICT space in the region, and what are some of the ICT tech-related trends and opportunities in that country. David, welcome.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to an interesting conversation with you.
Okay, great. I guess as much as I just had maybe about 2 sentences to say about Barbados, can you just give us a better overview of the country, and we'll take it from there?
Okay. Barbados is basically the easternmost country in the Caribbean island chain. Unlike most of the rest of the Caribbean, which is primarily volcanic, Barbados is pretty much limestone. The country is about 166 square miles, and we have a population of a little under 300,000 people. The country's GDP is a little north of $5 billion US, and we have an extremely highly educated population, which I think, as we start to discuss it, will probably start explaining some of why we were able to develop in the way we were.
Okay, so let's now focus in on telecoms and ICT. How developed is it in Barbados? How robust is the competition? And just talk to us about accessibility of services.
Okay, with regard to telecom and ICT, I would like to sort of split it into sort of 2 facets.
Okay.
One being infrastructure and the next one being services. From an infrastructure standpoint, Barbados is extremely developed. We have approximately, the numbers I have seen are approximately 100% coverage in terms of fiber to the home or fiber to any business or building that wants it.
Right.
More realistically, the number is probably still above 95%, but not necessarily 100%.
Understood.
So, in terms of the ability to provide very high capacity broadband to pretty much anyone in the country who can afford it, that capacity exists, and we have, in terms of those providers of broadband solutions, 2 main competitors in the market, Flow and Digicel.
Mm-hmm.
We also have another player in the market in the wireless space, who Ozone Wireless, who I am not totally sure of their current state. They were operational. They went through some issues. I believe they put some of those issues behind them, and I'm not totally sure if they are once again operational. But for sure, in terms of the mobile market, we also have Flow and Digicel,
mm-hmm.
and they're the ones providing triple play services generally into homes and businesses. On the services side, my personal feeling is that we are less developed than we are from an infrastructure standpoint.
Okay.
So when I have these conversations with other people in ICT, sometimes I have the conversation with my boss. We always sort of think about it as we've built excellent roads, but we haven't actually put the trucks on the roads to actually bring goods and services to people as we should. And that is where we need to be focusing as a country now.
Very interesting. I guess we'll probably have some more thoughts about that and try to deep dive a little bit more into that. In terms of services, though, how affordable is services? I'm just wondering to the degree to which that might contribute to the extent to which the services segments have developed.
Okay, so when we're speaking about services, are you referring to essentially the affordability of things like broadband internet access, or actually services delivered over that broadband?
All right, let's start. Initially, I think I would have started with the first one, but we can also explore the second as well.
Okay, so in relation to broadband internet access, Barbados is not the cheapest island in the Caribbean. However, I think most persons, certainly most middle class persons, have some form of broadband internet access into their house.
Right.
Even persons who may not necessarily have broadband internet access at home, most of those persons still have a mobile phone with a data plan, be it prepaid or postpaid, and still have access to the internet through that. And the plans can be quite reasonably priced. So what we do have, however, is for those persons who can afford fixed broadband through fiber, the actual bandwidth you get is extremely high. We're getting bandwidth up to, I think it probably starts now at around close to, for residences, close to 100 megabits a second and runs up to a gig.
Wow. Okay.
But by contrast, in relation to the actual digital services that we're seeing now being rolled out, what we have seen recently is a huge uptick in online and mobile banking.
Okay.
We have also seen with companies like Bit, we're now seeing, digital wallets and those sorts of services start being offered to the public. And the government is also starting to move a lot of their platforms online. So if we're doing things like paying taxes and those sorts of things, you can already pay your taxes online. And I think the government is moving into a place where you are capable of interacting with them completely online, which is pretty much partially an ideal scenario. It's an ideal scenario if you are digitally savvy, otherwise not necessarily so much.
Definitely. There's some interesting points there, and two things that I probably want to touch on is, and it goes back to a statement you had made about education, but why do you think Barbados's ICT and telecoms sector, relatively speaking, at least in terms of infrastructure, has surpassed that of other Caribbean countries?
There are two circumstances and that provide a natural assistance in relation to that. One, Barbados is relatively flat. So running infrastructure, it makes it easier to run infrastructure from point A to point B than having to cross mountains, as is the case in several other Caribbean islands.
Yes.
Two, Barbados population density is extremely high. So it means that when a service provider runs telecommunications infrastructure to an area, and it's usually a relatively short distance because the country is small, once you get to that area, there are quite a large number of subscribers that your infrastructure can support. So you're not running infrastructure across large distances to support a few number of people.
Right.
It's generally you run short distances to support a lot of people, as a result of which it became the return on investment, I believe, for the providers would have been shorter. So it made sort of financial sense, or a certain degree of financial sense, for them to implement that infrastructure.
But then it doesn't quite explain, in terms of the rollout, yes, of the infrastructure, but even let's say in terms of from a broadband internet perspective, the sort of speeds that you're seeing in Barbados. Because one could say that they could probably have gotten away, the providers that is, could have gotten away with they're having their fastest domestic package at 100 megabits per second, 200 megabits per second, but it's all up to a gig, 1 gigabit per second. And one could say that they could have had, much lower plans, or much slower plans, and increase the return on their investment for all intents and purposes.
That's a very good point. We had a situation where several years ago, several being 5, 6, 7 years ago, apart from cable and wireless, well, essentially after the government liberalized the telecommunications services market, cable and wireless was obviously the incumbent. Digicel moved into the market, but we then also had Carib Cable moving into the market and Barbados moving into the market, which spurred competition and encouraged the incumbent, and everyone had to then be providing bandwidth at a certain level.
Right.
What has happened since then is there has been consolidation of the market where, if memory serves, both Carib Cable and Barbados Barbados was absorbed into Flow. And I can't recall which of the providers also absorbed Carib Cable and their infrastructure.
Right.
But the result of that period of 4 players offering domestic broadband was that competition drove up performance.
Definitely.
And then, having done that, it's kind of difficult for a provider to, having taken over the person who was offering you a certain amount of bandwidth, to then turn around and say, well, I'm now reducing how much you can get at the same price.
Definitely.
That would be difficult. And they themselves, the incumbents, also had to increase what they were offering to match the new entrants into the market.
Okay. Well, I mean, here it is, though, that at least in terms of infrastructure and broadband speed, just looking at those two elements, Barbados is way ahead of so many of its Caribbean neighbors. So I guess certainly having that level of competition for some period of time had set the market up in such a way that it was difficult to claw back. Certainly based on customer expectations, and even in terms of your business customers as well, and looking for improvements across the board that would flow back to consumers. So in terms of, technology getting cheaper and therefore probably increasing speeds to continue to justify the rates that are being charged over time.
Yes. And the providers tend to be very good in terms of they want to see their pipes being filled. So they tend to be willing to work with customers in terms of helping the customers maximize the use of the infrastructure they're providing. Obviously more so on the business side, but on the consumer side as well.
Definitely. Okay, and just another point, based on a point you had raised earlier in terms of government now wanting to put a lot of their services online. And I noted, I was doing some research last year. Time has flown. And needed to get some data on Barbados with respect to telecoms and ICT. And it was just so difficult to do so online. And here it is, I'm based in Jamaica, and I ended up having to call to talk with technocrats in various ministries to try to get the information. So I am heartened that at least there seems to be some effort by the government to probably embrace and roll out e-government related initiatives. Granted that e-government has been something that has been on the cards for many countries for so long. I
Yes.
also gather, though, that with the recent change of government, there seems to be a particular focus on ICT. Can you give us some insight into that, whether or not what I understand is true, and what might be some of the plans of which you might be aware?
Okay. Well, it is true that the new government, since the change of government last year, the new government has a renewed focus on ICTs and digital transformation as part of the backbone of Barbados economic recovery and Barbados future growth. I think, to my mind, they initially signaled their intent to be serious about it by forming a new Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technologies. And in that ministry, they, among other things, they took various disparate government departments that had been sort of operating under different ministries and brought them together in order to sort of leverage synergies of them working collaboratively and a single reporting line as opposed to how it had been before. So I think the government's focus in terms of national digital transformation, all their e-government initiatives, will now be running through the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Smart Technology, as that is sort of like the point place for all governments' ICT and digital transformation initiatives. In addition, the government has engaged consultants to come and do work in relation to where Barbados is and its readiness for digital transformation and its readiness for public sector innovation. One of the initiatives, or a major initiative that the government has been working on, and it's public knowledge, so I'm not telling you anything special, is they're working on an initiative called CivTech, which essentially replicates the CivTech Accelerator out of Scotland. The idea being to leverage private sector innovators and entrepreneurs to help government departments solve problems and issues by means of an accelerator. So essentially, my understanding of how it works, and I stand to be corrected on this, is that government departments that want either A, have a problem, or B, want a solution for something specific, would essentially speak to the accelerator and say, we need a solution for this. The accelerator would then put the problem to the entrepreneurial community, and not necessarily the established entrepreneurial community, but put the problem to civil society and the private sector to say, these people are looking for a solution for this, and allow persons, groups, businesses, etc., to pitch solution ideas. And the best solution ideas will then get brought into the accelerator and used to actually build solutions that address the issues that the government departments are facing. So that has sort of two outcomes. One, it addresses the problems that the government is facing and hopefully rapidly builds solutions that make the government more efficient. But on the other side, it also increases the innovation and entrepreneurial capacity of civil society and the private sector.
Absolutely.
Yes. So I think CivTech is one of the main drivers that the government is looking at in terms of driving sort of future digital transformation on a national scale.
That's excellent. I certainly want to touch back on entrepreneurship I recognize that this may not be your forte, but we'll still just, dip our toes in. But before we do that, I just wanted us to just spend a few moments talking about the Internet Society and the Barbados Chapter, of which you are the president.
Yes.
So if you can just give us a little sense of, how does the Barbados Chapter of the Internet Society fit into the tech and ICT space in Barbados?
Okay, so let me start by giving you a little bit of background on the Internet Society in general. The Internet Society is a global organization. It's 25, I think this year might mark 26 years old. And it is a global organization dedicated to the idea that the internet should be free, open, and available to the benefit of all people.
All right.
The society itself works through chapters, local chapters. They can be national, or for larger countries, they can be city chapters, regional chapters. But in Barbados' case, it's a national chapter. And the chapters do various things. We do policy advocacy. We do education and awareness. We try to foster discussions through things like the Internet Governance Forum. So the Barbados held its first Internet Governance Forum in 2017, National Internet Governance Forum in 2017. The chapter had sort of brought together various stakeholders, and we held a forum talking about issues like cybersecurity and child online protection and the digital economy. And the idea was to bring together stakeholders from all facets of society, the Barbados government, from civil society, from the private sector, to have a national discourse on where, to take a hard look at where we are and where we want to go, and start raising some of these issues in the minds of people who may not necessarily have thought about it.
Right.
We had a second one last year, a second Internet Governance Forum last year, and our third Internet Governance Forum is coming up later this year.
Okay, you don't have the dates as yet.
We are looking at October 3rd.
Okay.
Right now for the Internet Governance Forum, but one of the things that emerged last year was that they wanted the forum, because the forum had previously been 2 days long, was that we were trying to stuff too much discussion into too little time, so we needed more time.
Okay, so in 2017 you had it for 2 days, and I guess 2018 you just had a 1-day event.
2018 was also 2 days.
Oh, it was also 2 days. Oh, so
yes.
they actually wanted now to be over a longer period of time. That was that's some of the feedback that you all got.
We needed to get the discussions were, it was the matter that it was either a longer period of time or fewer discussions within the period of time, to give the discussions more time to ventilate the issues.
Understood. Okay.
Now, that sort of jived with an idea I had originally had back in 2016 to bring together stakeholders for a national conference on innovation and digital transformation. And at the time, I had christened it Digital Barbados. As fate would have it, the Digital Barbados concept was introduced to some of the people that I had approached were also related to various government departments and whatnot at the time. But nothing came of it back in 2016 or 2017. The idea of Digital Barbados, which was then I subsequently then mentioned it up to last year, and thought perhaps it would be time to sort of meld the notion of the Internet Governance Forum expanding with a Digital Barbados conference. And we had some conversations around it, and the government seems very interested in not specifically my idea, but the concept of a smart a Smart Barbados. I think what we're terming is Smart Barbados Week, where we have a week of discussions around digital transformation nationally, both public sector, private sector, and civil society, innovation, and then the Internet Governance Forum will be sort of a part of that week.
Okay, sounds good. And certainly in having that Internet Governance Forum at that time, it can then inform whatever presence Barbados might want to have at the Global Internet Governance Forum.
I am sure that that is something will take into account. No one from, well, I saw Barbados hasn't been represented at the Global Internet Governance Forum the last 2 years, although I believe Barbados may have been represented from a government standpoint. But certainly the idea of in a coming out of a discussion like that, a national discussion around digital transformation, a national discussion around internet issues, then we would then have a very good platform with which to engage the rest of the world at the IGF.
Definitely. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops and to put it in my calendar. But just going back now to the whole question of entrepreneurship and certainly helping the government to solve its problems, but also really bolstering, I guess, the whole innovative and innovation spirit in Barbados. I now, granted, of course, you are not an entrepreneur yourself, but still being a resident of the country, and I'm sure having engaged entrepreneurs from time to time and business people, what do you think it's like to be an entrepreneur in Barbados, and what do you think about the country's startup environment and startup culture?
Okay, although I'm not an entrepreneur, I have had plenty of discussions with persons who are mentors in startup incubators and accelerators around the country. And there are, how should I put it? The startup culture in itself is relatively limited in Barbados. There are pockets of entrepreneurship, and I think the younger generation is more and more seeing entrepreneurship as a viable career path. However, historically, we had been raised to go to school, get a good job, go and work for someone, and keep that job until retirement and pass, that ethos on to the next generation.
Right.
We have culturally been relatively risk averse. And again, culturally, there's also been this cultural situation whereby people have long memories. So whereas it is common practice, if you hear the stories of entrepreneurs in developed ecosystems, they will tell you that basically they succeeded in their 8th business.
Right, yes.
In Barbados, it could be rather difficult to get to number 8.
Understood. And I think it's so true across the region that we don't fully appreciate that entrepreneurship, a considerable part of it is about the failure.
Yes.
To the success. And as you rightfully said, yes, we have long memories. So if you fail, that can be just a mark against you and really thwart any of the other projects and ventures that you might want to pursue at a later date.
Yes. But the interesting thing is, I had the opportunity to have some conversations around people who are angel investors and who have worked with VCs. And one of the interesting questions that they asked is, so tell me some of the things you failed at and what you learned from it. And we need to be able to answer those questions.
Right.
That's not a question you often hear in Barbados. It's, we want to know that you were successful, from day one.
Right.
Which I don't think is realistic.
But also too that in having failures, you are more experienced, you learn so much from it. So I think one may actually find that, VCs and angel investors might be more skeptical if you have not had any failures before.
That is exactly it. That is exactly it. So I think so. We need to, and it's culture change. We need to be really from the primary school level, changing the mindsets of teachers and students from one of you have to do this and get this right first time, so you don't take a risk trying something different, to one of experimentation, failure, and learning. So that is, and I think that would hopefully, as we try to build out things like CivTech and as we try to build out innovative capacity, the culture change is going to come where we recognize that failure is an integral part of success.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the other point I wanted to make was that I think something else that would be of great benefit is exposure to greater levels of exposure of our young entrepreneurs to successful entrepreneurs from elsewhere in the world. So almost I see it as something along the lines of an exchange program with experienced entrepreneurial ecosystems, where we send our sort of most promising entrepreneurs to, to London, to Ontario, to Silicon Valley, to see what a mature ecosystem looks like and how we work in there. And we also try to encourage or attract experienced serial entrepreneurs from other places to come and bring their expertise here, so that our young entrepreneurs have mentors who have actually done it and who have succeeded to help walk them through the process.
Understood. But David, I'm wondering whether or not it's really the entrepreneurs who need that exposure. Yes, I take that point, but somehow I'm just concerned that you also create a situation where your entrepreneurs become frustrated by the limitations of the environment in which they live, specifically at this point for our conversation, Barbados. Because as you said, if the community tends to have a long memory of your failures, and perhaps various supports are not there for the entrepreneur that one may typically find in a more developed environment, then exposing your entrepreneurs in that, but then bringing them back to Barbados or having them come back to Barbados to work in that environment could be a huge source of frustration for them. So I'm thinking somehow, and I'm not even sure who exactly or what exactly would also need to be targeted to try to help to help the environment to mature as well.
Yeah, it's going to take a national effort in terms of educating the population, in terms of educating prospective investors, in terms of educating the different bodies who are in charge of regulation. It's going to take possibly changes in legislation to encourage equity investment and risk capital investment, of which there is very little available in Barbados right now.
Right.
By and large, the startup community in Barbados have access to loans from banks. And banks are not in the business of loaning high-risk businesses
Exactly.
money. But the Prime Minister made the point that there are, I can't remember how many $billion she indicated, but billions of dollars sitting down in bank accounts of just the general public right now in Barbados, gaining what, 1% interest, 0.1% interest.
Yes.
Whereas if we had the financial instruments to allow those persons to take some of that money that is not actually making them any money and possibly invest it in admittedly higher risk ventures,
Mm-hmm.
but also significantly higher reward ventures, there may be a way to start that process of jump starting that entrepreneurial capacity and starting to put the packaging around what is needed so that the entrepreneurs themselves don't get frustrated.
Definitely. And I was even thinking as you're talking about the CivTech Accelerator, because to some degree, I think that could also be a way or a channel through which government, as I guess the driver of that accelerator, to begin to change the mindset and to begin to change the environment that entrepreneurs typically working in Barbados. So that might be interesting to see how they approach initiatives and projects.
Yes, I do believe that's probably one of the goals, because one of the outcomes from the accelerator, hopefully the companies that graduate the accelerator would have essentially created a solution, and a polished solution, that meets a need within the government that helps improve government efficiency. But one of the other outcomes is that they now have a product or a solution that they can offer to the rest of the world that says, if you have a problem similar to this, we have a solution that meets your need. And it's not like we're offering you the first. We have an active customer who has this in use.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that 0 to 1 problem, getting to your first customer, that problem would be resolved because you already have your first customer, namely the government of Barbados.
Understood. And actually, it's a model that has worked. I don't know if you heard my interview with the gentleman of Rovika, probably a few months ago now. And to some degree, they have gotten some success from that. They are based in Montserrat and developed a couple of products for the government of Montserrat. And basically, the government of Montserrat was their first customer for this product. And therefore, they're now getting to a point where they can expand and market the product to other Caribbean countries, for example, and I guess hopefully the wider world eventually. So it does work.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm in complete agreement with you on that.
Okay, so let's begin to wind down. I do have a few more questions, and
Sure.
And many of them just have to do now with trends in Barbados, strengths and weaknesses, and so on. So let's just talk about maybe what might be some of the trends, that tech or business, tech-related trends that one is seeing in Barbados. Some of it, I think, came out in the earlier conversation, but probably let's just sort of frame them up now.
Mm-hmm. So from a tech-related, a lot of companies are starting to recognize the value of engaging customers online to the point where I actually had an issue, and this was interesting because it was a government owned entity. I had an issue. The water was off by my house, and I attempted to contact the Barbados Water Authority and was unable to get hold of them. And something occurred to me: try their Facebook page. I went on their Facebook page, sent them a Facebook message. They replied to me within maybe 2 minutes and immediately actioned getting stuff done. And that is something that, that is, to my mind, a little bit revolutionary for Barbados. Right? So a lot of companies are recognizing that even those who are not overly engaging via their websites, a lot of companies are seeing the value of social media as an engagement platform in order to be able to conduct dialogues with their customers. So that's one trend. Another trend is, by and large, companies are sort of increasingly recognizing the need to but not just to go digital, but the need to have digital transformation as more than just a checkbox by word that they can say, yes, we're doing this. They're recognizing the need that it can actually drive business value, and that they need to take it seriously. Now, there are some other things that are going on. So, for example, the government recently passed a Data Privacy Act. So we now have data privacy legislation that requires businesses to put a certain amount of security around their customers' data, and that is an excellent thing. However, it's going to require many businesses adding skill sets that they do not currently have in-house. And in the case of small businesses, that they might not be able to afford. So I speak to people in small businesses who are very concerned that the act requires you to have a data privacy officer. So, but their business has 3 people in it. They can't afford to hire a data privacy officer, and they're concerned about, so how will these sorts of circumstances be managed?
Right.
So, my concern is that as we seek to move rapidly forward in digital transformation, we take all of the possible impacts into account, and we engage with all of the possibly affected stakeholders so that we don't end up leaving persons behind. So that as all the banks move to mobile banking and online banking, the old folks who still like to walk with their bank book into the bank, stand up in the line and get all of their transactions written down for them in the book, so they don't get behind in this brave new digital world. And that is a particular concern of mine. How do we make sure that in going digital, we are inclusive of everybody in society?
Definitely. Those are some cogent points. You really want ICT to facilitate inclusiveness, and it really takes a concerted effort for that to happen. Okay, so let's just now talk about strengths and weaknesses, or challenges, let's say challenges instead, of the Barbados tech space. What might be some of the strengths, and what might be some of the challenges that the country ought to be addressing?
In terms of strengths, we have very highly trained persons in Barbados around in tech. We have just about every sort of tech skill. Let me rephrase that. In terms of computer science, we train and develop lots of persons with computer science skills.
Right.
We do not necessarily, from a tech standpoint, where I think we're missing out is training engineers. Most of the engineers that we have in Barbados essentially were trained outside of Barbados.
Right.
Because I can't think of any institutions in Barbados that actually offer, advanced degrees or advanced degrees around the engineering space. So, but we do have tech skills. Where we are, from a weakness standpoint, there tends to be a disconnect between business and tech. And part of the issue, I think, is that the tech people don't necessarily speak business, and the business people don't necessarily speak tech.
That definitely happened.
Right. So, when the engineer runs into the room and says, the Cisco routers need patching, or it's going to be susceptible to hijacking or malware, the business people raise an eyebrow and say, speak English. And so I think we have to sort of bridge that divide. between, helping the tech people to understand how to speak to business people in a way that makes sense. I think other weaknesses, and it's not necessarily around tech per se, but around, and when I speak to the people in Barbados ICT Professional Association, they also, the current president is sort of very, very big on this. The fact that ICT engineers are still thought of in many businesses as technicians. The respect for the field isn't necessarily there.
Right.
So in much the same way that accounting professionals are respected and legal professionals are respected and medical professionals are respected and architects and engineers are respected, the perspective is that persons who work in ICT aren't given the same level of respect. It's sort of, not treated the same way and not taken as seriously. So as a result of that, what happens is that the tech sector isn't necessarily capable of contributing as much to the business bottom line as it can and should. And which goes back to the first point of, tech needs to understand business.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, the one last point I wanted to make was that, and this isn't specifically related to tech, but the general business environment. With the government's introduction of the current corporate tax rate, I think is going to essentially help bring technology businesses and business in general, but technology business in particular, into Barbados. As you would be aware, quite a few Caribbean countries were blacklisted by either the EU or the OECD in relation to having these sort of like harmful corporate tax practices, whereby they're considered tax havens because their taxation regime on offshore businesses is so low.
Right.
So the government decided, instead of changing the tax rate on offshore businesses, they brought the local tax rate into line with the offshore tax rate. So as a result, now Barbados tax rate is the same for all businesses, whether you are local or an international business company. And I think that is can be seen of as a strength, not specifically of the tech sector, but a strength in the economy in general.
Right.
Yeah.
Understood. Okay. And that certainly, as you said, bodes well for opportunities. But do you see any other, and that's my final question, any other ICT tech-related opportunities that you see in Barbados?
Yes. Specifically, there is a huge push. I'm not even sure if push is the right word, but we are embracing especially blockchain. And I think most Caribbean countries, frankly, are embracing blockchain as a possible driver of future economic growth. And Barbados is no different because one of our major economic drivers in the past has been the financial services sector.
Right.
And what has happened, due to various things, the financial services sector has shrunk economically over the past 10 to 15 years. And I think we see blockchain and blockchain-based technologies, especially as it relates to fintech, as being a possible driver for economic growth. And we have had success attracting some blockchain companies to Barbados. The fact that we have a functional blockchain and regulatory sandbox now in Barbados, I think is also going to be a boon in terms of attracting blockchain-based companies into Barbados and fintechs into Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is going to be a one particular avenue going forward. I think we also are starting to develop skills around artificial intelligence. That I think artificial intelligence is basically the future of computing. I think that's going to, the two of those, blockchain-based technology and artificial intelligence, are going to, be the drivers of ICTs for the next 20, 30 years. And I think as if we can build out and continue to build out skills in those two areas, I think that can allow us to carve out a niche within the bigger ICT space that could make Barbados very attractive.
Oh, excellent. So, David, that was my final question. Actually, I have so many more, but I think we have blown past the time and it's getting, I need to release you shortly. So,
Yes.
Thank you so much for just, taking the time to share with us some insights on Barbados. I certainly think as somebody from the English-speaking Caribbean and doing the work that I do, I thought I knew quite a bit about Barbados and the tech space there. But I certainly learned some new things about, what is going on in Barbados and probably what the future holds for the country moving forward, at least from a ICT and tech perspective.
Well, I mean, it's been wonderful having this conversation. I hope I was able to be helpful.
Absolutely, you definitely have been.
Okay, and I look forward to future conversations. I'm when we have the date for the Internet Governance Forum firmed up, I will certainly send you an invitation to attend.
Okay, then. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you and have a wonderful day.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.